Today we're going to be talking about hypothesis testing, and we're going to consider the scenario in which researchers want to know if a drug is effective in reducing cancer. We're going to pick up with a little bit of review, which is just formulating the null hypothesis. So remember, the null hypothesis is always a statement of no effect. So the null is that the drug does not affect cancer. Okay. The alternative is a statement of the effect, and that's what the researchers hope to establish. So that is the drug, um, the null needs to be a statement of no effect. So we need to put this not, does not affect cancer. And the alternative is that the drug does reduce cancer. So a statement of no effect for the null, statement of an effect for the alternative. Now, when we test hypotheses, there are many outcomes um, for hypothesis testing. So there's a reality here, and it's hard to know the reality. Um, so one reality is that the null is true. Okay. Another reality is that the alternative is true. Okay. Um, we're not able to know the reality, otherwise we wouldn't need to do anything. But the hope is that the data reflects reality, and we have to make a decision. Okay. Our decision can be, and I'll put it in the statistical jargon, the null is one decision can be that we fail to reject the null. So that's statistical jargon. What that basically boils down to saying is that we accept that the null is true. Um, but statisticians are a different type of people. Um, there are many things that complicate that statement. So, for example, um, we could make this decision based on insufficient data. If we had more data, it could show that the alternative is true rather than uh, the null. And so we're hesitant to say we accept the null, but you can think of it like that if you like. The other option, and I'll put the statistical jargon first, is to reject the null in favor of the alternative. In in simpler terms, that basically says that we accept the alternative hypothesis is true. Okay, so I'll put this in blue because this is how you could think of it, but it's not the language we'll use. So you could say that you accept the null. And for this one, you could say that you accept the alternative. But you'll never hear that language from statisticians, just FYI. Okay. Okay, so it's decision time. Remember, you don't know the reality. That's what you're trying to infer. So if the reality is that the null is true and you fail to reject the null, remember that means, in other words, you basically accept the null as true, then you made the right decision. So That's a very happy thing. You made the right decision. Another outcome could be that the null is true, but you decided to accept the alternative, i.e., reject the null in favor of the alternative. So here this means you're rejecting a true null hypothesis. Um, so perhaps you had a bad sample or you had an insufficient sample size, for instance, and you didn't have enough data. That can happen. So this is a very sad thing because when your boss finds this out, they're gonna be really angry. And this is called a type 1 error because you did make an error here with this decision. The null was true, but you decide to go with the alternative. Okay. Okay. Another outcome could be that the alternative is true, but you decided to fail to reject the null. Remember, that means that you accepted the null. So again, this is a sad thing. Your bosses are going to be really angry with you at this outcome. And this is called a type 2 error. Okay? So that's a type 2 error. You made the wrong decision. Um, and then the last outcome, we always need to end in a happy note, is you made the right decision. You went with the alternative, and the alternative is true. Okay? So these are the outcomes of hypothesis testing. This is what a type 1 error means. So type 1 error means to reject a true null. Okay? In the context of this example that researchers want to know if a drug is effective, um, here it means that we've rejected the null. We've concluded the drug does reduce cancer when in fact it does not. So in this example, it means you have concluded um, that the drug is effective when in fact it is not. Okay. Then there's also what's called a type 2 error. Okay. Okay. So here, this means that you fail to reject the null when the alternative is true. Okay. And in this example, a type 2 error means that you've concluded the drug um, has no effect when it actually does have an effect. Okay. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. This was a little bit more detail on hypothesis testing and type 1 and 2 errors. Thank you very much.